When the story behind the story of Lee Pennington premiered at the University of Louisville, Kentucky on June 25, 2023, the full-length film could only portray mere snippets of his books, plays, and documentaries. It was evident by the remarks of attendees that they wanted more details, just more of hearing the words from the soft-spoken storyteller himself. It should be noted that this was by no means the totality of all the works he has completed, as there are numerous articles, unpublished collections, and songs throughout a lifetime of curiosity, exploration, and adventure. Another dig into the footage of this extended version came to life to become this YouTube docuseries. Thank you for joining us for episode 1 of The Story Behind the Story of Lee Pennington, extended version.
Daniel Boone, George Rogers Clark, York, Kit Carson, John James Audubon, Abraham Lincoln, Robert Penn Warren, Jesse Stewart, D.W. Griffith, Edgar Casey, Loretta Lynn, Bill Monroe, Merle Travis, A.B. Griffey Jr., Elizabeth Maddox Roberts, Thomas Merton, Harriet Simpson Arno, John Jacob Niles, Lionel Hampton, Gene Ritchie, Pee Wee Reese, the Everly Brothers, Muhammad Ali, James Still, Hunter S. Thompson, Wendell Berry, Barbara Kingsolver, the Judds, Bobby Ann Mason, Dwight Yoakam, Johnny Depp, George Clooney, Sturgill Simpson, Chris Stapleton, Lee Pennington, did you hear me? Lee Pennington is a Kentucky original, a national treasure, a gift beyond measure.
Lee Pennington grew up in Greenup County, Kentucky, is an award-winning author, poet, filmmaker, and playwright. He's also taught for nearly 40 years.
I remember when I was about 8 years old that Lee and his wife Joy visited us in our tiny house in Portsmouth, Ohio. Other than smoking a pipe and having a beard, I knew very little about him. I did find out he was a teacher in New York City. I knew him as Uncle Lee. I didn't know at the time I was not to see him for many years.
It was nearly 50 years later that I did see Lee again. First, I saw him at the screening of Room to Fly at the University of Louisville, and he recognized me after all those years. Then later at a family reunion, we reconnected to talk about filmmaking. Finally, at the Imaginarium Convention in Louisville, where he was on a panel discussion, I later told him about how I loved hearing about his documentaries, his books, his plays, and all that, how they came to be. And it later became the story behind the story of Lee Pennington.
Yeah, In Search of the Mudmen, Laura, was the beginning of Jolie Productions. I got the idea back in 1989 to go to Papua New Guinea. I had been near there. Joy, my late wife, and I had gone to Australia, and I had my still camera and took all sorts of pictures. And I thought, boy, what a loss, because I met a lot of the Aboriginal people. Sometimes they were talking about their culture, their art, and all I was getting was the still pictures. So it was, I just wanted to get everything I could get, all the sound, all the pictures, and film is capable of doing that. And so I started doing a great deal of research on what kind of camera. First of all, I wanted the smallest camera I could get. If I could have got one an inch square and still it would have been workable, I would have done that. But I wound up selecting what was in those days a very small, probably 2-pound Video 8 camera, and it was a little Sony camera. I didn't know when I went to Papua New Guinea, I didn't have enough foresight to even take a tripod. So I took, and back in those days there was not any compensation within the camera to steady things. So my first documentary, in a lot of ways, if I couldn't set the camera down on a rock someplace and film, or a stump, or lean it against a tree, then it was bouncy like old war movies or something. But when I went to New Guinea, I picked Papua New Guinea because that was literally the last major place on the planet to be explored. And Papua New Guinea, right before we went to Papua New Guinea, some explorers had discovered a new tribe up in the highlands that nobody knew anything about. And this was in 1990. So, and after that, they discovered even another tribe, probably around the year 2000. So it was the first white contact in the highlands took place in 1931. There were 3 brothers, known as the Leahy brothers. Their leader was Michael Leahy, and they went into Papua New Guinea looking for gold. And they got up into the highlands and met what amounted to well over 1 million people that no one knew even was there. So 1931 was the first white contact in the highlands, and it was amazing because I wanted to go into the highlands, and I was curious as to whether or not there would be anyone left in the highlands who was there when the Leahy brothers came in there. Now, when the Leahy brothers came in, Michael brought a camera, a film camera, and actually filmed many of the scenes of how those people reacted. Well, when they saw the white people down in the rivers with their pans panning for gold, they thought these were their ancestors coming back looking for their bones. And so they literally thought that the Leahy brothers and the many people they had with them were just wonderful ancestors. They looked like ghosts to them, and so they expected them to be that. Well, when we went into the highlands and had this little camera, we were able to make contact with several different levels of culture. When we got into Port Moresby, was the hottest, humid place I've ever been in my life. And we got on the bed, and the bed was just soaking wet because of the humidity. We tried to sleep a little bit because we had flown pretty much all night to get there. And we were still quite a bit away from where we wanted to be in the highlands, and we were going, first of all, up to Mount Hagen, which is about halfway up of New Guinea, Tari being is pretty close up to the West Irian border. And we were ultimately going to wind up at Tari, but we went to Mount Hagen first. And we had a person helping us out, a guide that was he could speak all the languages we needed to have spoken, and as well as English, and so we needed him because we didn't know the languages, and we went to the airport, and we were supposed to get on this plane, fly up to Mount Hagen, and in New Guinea, the small planes, there's no such thing as a real timetable, and there's no such thing as a real seat arrangement. You just you get on the plane, whatever seat's available is where you sit. But somehow it was later than we thought it would be, and he went to check, and our plane had left without us. And so he said not to worry, that there'd be another plane coming along in an hour, and that would take us on up, and indeed it did. We did not find out until later that the plane we were supposed to be on held 12 passengers, and they put 14 passengers on the plane. And it went down in the mountains, and every person on the plane was killed. But we didn't find that out until we got up to Mount Hagen. When we got to Mount Hagen, I wanted to get out and explore around, not realizing even before I went, I had no idea. But you just can't do that. It's too dangerous to get out, even out of the hotel complex. All the hotel complexes that we stayed at, including the one at Port Moresby, had armed guards around the hotel and a barricade, a wall, all the way around each facility. And we were allowed to explore around inside that barricade, but not get outside of that. So at Mount Hagen, we got to go out and visit some of the tribes. Now, the people in Mount Hagen, how do you say, would be more civilized. Hate that word. But they would be more advanced than, from a primitive point of view, than they would be on up at Tari. When we got to Tari, we ultimately we found that we were stepping back into the Stone Age, literally. The people were using weapons, bows and arrows, and the points of the arrows and spears were stone, flint, like Native America on this continent. The documentary that we wound up doing, In Search of the Mudmen, that occurred in the editing after we got back home. I mean, we were searching for ancient cultures and rituals, etc., many of which we ran into in the filming and in the exploration. But the Mudmen were located over at a place called Asaro, and it was it was out of Mount Hagen a few miles, and not quite up into the deep highlands such as Tari was. But we got to visit with several of the tribes, and just out of sheer luck, on our way back from meeting some of the first tribes out of Mount Hagen, with a guide by the name of Busy Bee, and he had a tattoo on his arm that said Busy Bee. I managed to get that in the film. But once we were in the hotel complex, we stayed there for a few days, and we could only go outside the complex with a guide. So our first stop outside the complex was the local market. And how fascinating that was, just to walk through the market and see all the different vegetables and the people in very primitive looking clothing, grass clothing, some of it, and which they fondly refer to after some of the European kind of contact as ass grass, because it just covers them up barely, I guess. But how fascinating to go through that market and to see 26 different varieties of sweet potatoes. Now, remember, sweet potato is indigenous to South America, but the main food supply in the Pacific when European contact was made was the sweet potato. So there has to have been some connection between all of Polynesia, really. The people of Papua New Guinea who are very different from the Polynesians, and the Polynesians. When Captain Cook went through his exploration, he found that, when he was on Easter Island, sweet potato was the main food supply. When he got into Tahiti, sweet potato was the main food supply. When he got into New Zealand, sweet potato was the main food supply. So all these islands that he went to all over the Pacific, here was this major product that originated in South America. So the question is, how did it get into Polynesia? And you only got two answers that I see. Either somebody from South America took it there, because you can't drop a sweet potato in the ocean and float across and make more sweet potatoes, and the salt water kills it. So it has to be transported by human hands. And it either had to go from South America there, or somebody in Polynesia had to go to South America and get it and take it back. I mean, those are the only two choices that I can see, and there's been a great deal of arguments on which way it went. The thing that we ran into in Papua New Guinea that was so fascinating to me was that they have an expression for a certain group of people there, and they call them rascals, and that's such a kind expression. They're really marauders that have been lost in between cultures. When the white contact was made, the Caucasian contact was made with these people, white culture, like any culture, that it makes you assimilate with who they are. When the Europeans came to the Americas, they made the Indians assimilate, or tried to. And what happens is you have some people are successful at doing that in the culture, and you have some people that aren't successful at doing that. And you have some people that assimilate, some people that can't go back to their regular culture because it's disappearing, so they're lost in between. And those are the people they refer to as rascals, and that's why it's so dangerous in Papua New Guinea, because the rascals, in order to survive, they will kill you for 10 cents, And we talked to indigenous people. We talked to a chief at one of the villages, chief by the name of Baije, and his son had been killed by a rascal, even though they were all the same people. But it's the only way they can survive. They can't survive in the old culture because mostly it doesn't exist. Some people maintain that old culture in spite of it. They can't exist in the new culture where people are trying to assimilate, and so they're caught right in between. And it's that in between that is a disaster for an awful lot of people. The other thing in Papua New Guinea that fascinated me was the severe concept of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. If one were driving along in New Guinea and if one ran over somebody, it's the law that you don't stop. Now on this continent, if you hit somebody and you leave the scene, it's called hit and run, and it's illegal. In New Guinea, if you run over somebody, it's the law that you keep going on. And the reason it is because if you run over somebody and you break their arm, then they will break your arm. If you kill somebody, then you owe them a body and they will kill you. And so it's a law that you don't stop. I've never seen a place quite, I grew up around eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, and the biblical concept of that, but Papua New Guinea was the most severe I ever saw that. When we got to Mount Hagen, we got out and visited some of the tribes. One of the days we got out, it was census day, and they had one car for the tribe. And that car was the most beat up car I'd ever seen in my life. It was like everybody who drove it, nobody knew how to drive, and they, hit rocks or whatever else. It was just tore all to pieces. But they were still using it. Didn't have doors on it, as I remember, and it looked like it wouldn't run. But they would go out and get people and bring them in for the census. And Joy, I remember, the tribe wanted to bargain with her and sell her a rock they had collected. It was a pretty good sized rock, so they couldn't she couldn't carry it back in her suitcase, so she asked for a smaller rock, and they brought a smaller rock out, and she bargained with it. Then they had what they call second price. They asked a price, I don't know, $3 or $4, and no, that's too much, so second price. So then they lowered it some, and then she bought the rock, and we have it now. When we got out from Mount Hagen, on the way back, we got to witness an incredible event right on the spot. It's just one of those synchronistic kind of thing that happens. It was the bride price, and the bride price is where the groom gathers up all of these different kinds of material, clothing, pigs. I even saw a guitar hanging in a tree. All the money he can get, and he gives it to the father of the bride, and that's called the bride price. It's true of their bride price in many of the indigenous cultures, but we got to witness this going on. There were great speeches. We couldn't stay for all of it. We stayed a couple of hours, but the speeches sometimes would go for hours and hours into the night, and they just keep going. The father would speak, the father of the bride, the father of the groom, the grandfathers, and ask, the main thing of the bride price were the gift of pigs. Pig was the most valuable thing there. A full-grown pig or year-old pig would be worth probably $1,000 in American money, and they brought in. We got to film the staking of the pigs. They have a stake for each pig. They have a thing around his leg holding him, and they bring him in and tie him to a stake, and then the groom's father. You'd think he becomes rich because of all this. But what we saw was he divides everything up with everybody in the village. And so it's an amazing concept. You think, gee, look how rich he is because of his selling his daughter at the bride price or whatever. But he shares it with everybody. So there's this magnificent communal sharing that goes on. And we got to see that just quite by accident. It wasn't anything we planned, it just so happened. And then once we had been at Mount Hagen a while, we went on up to Tari, and it was a 10.5-hour trip in a high-axle all-terrain vehicle, 4-wheel drive. And it's just a rock road, that's all. I mean, it's just cut out through the total wilderness. No facilities going or coming. They where we were staying, the lodge where we were staying, they packed us a lunch, and we took that along. We had somebody join us that was going to fly up. That's one of the main ways of traveling in New Guinea, like Alaska. Without good roads, the best way to get from one place to another is airplane, small airplane. As we got up toward Tari, we got right in the middle of a tribal war that had been going on for some time, and they had dug a 20-foot deep hole in the road, so we had to go off the road and in the Jeep and try to get around, and they didn't really like us going through. They weren't after us, they were after each other. But back to that eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, what happens is the war starts, somebody kills somebody. Okay, the other tribe kills 2 people, and then the other tribe kills 2 or 3 people, and it goes on. The tribal wars sometimes last 20, 30 years or more. The government started a thing called compensation, and that is if I kill somebody in your tribe, accidentally or otherwise, I can compensate you maybe by giving you 50 pigs, and then everything's okay. But the compensation has stuck. The concept of compensation has stuck, and every tribe has it. And some of the Europeans that are running the government, they will come in and do some damage to somebody in the tribe, maybe kill them even, and then if they don't compensate, there's going to be war. And one of our guides, who became a very close friend, was in that situation. Joy and I ran the Corn Island Storytelling Festival for 27 years, and we brought Paji Harvoli to Kentucky to be in that festival to tell his story. I had interviewed him in Papua New Guinea, and he detailed for me 12 generations of his family. Now I can go back 3 or 4 generations, and I'm getting iffy when I get back to the 3rd generation or so, because great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother and so forth, these are people that were gone before I was here. But Paji was able to detail 12 generations. It was just unbelievable to me. And he had many of the tribal stories. Well, we brought him to the Corn Island Festival, and when he went back to Tari, he was made chief of the tribe. Obviously, he was the first Huli ever to come to the United States, so come to America. So, and how he got here, I'll never know. I mean, it's just a brilliant indigenous person. He had been taught by the Australian missionaries, and one of the reasons we were able to hire him as a guide and interpreter, he spoke 8 tribal languages, and he spoke a little English, plenty enough to be an interpreter for us. He was taught by Australian missionaries English, and so we had that as our guide and interpreter. But when he went back and they made him chief, later on we brought him back again, and he was amazing while he was here, because here's a guy who somehow got to the United States flying 27 hours, stopping in Australia and someplace else, Honolulu, I think, and then Los Angeles and Cincinnati, and then finally to Louisville. A guy who had never seen a traffic light, had never seen anything like a Coke machine. And here he comes on this. We sat down in the living room in there, and we had, I put the camera on. Haven't looked at the film since. But I just turned the camera on and let the camera roll. And he told us every gate, every number, every flight, every number. See, his is an oral tradition. Many say that the oral tradition is not accurate, but those who live in it, it's incredibly accurate, probably more accurate than the written tradition, because if you make a mistake in writing, that gets repeated. If you make a mistake in the oral tradition, you have to go back and relearn the tradition and make the right statement, otherwise they won't let you go forward as a teller. So that was one of the amazing things that happened up in Tari. And I was saying a little bit earlier that the government started compensation, and the wars, they tried to come up with a thing called the Sing Sing, which is a beautiful, beautiful ritual. They dress in these elaborate paints and clothing and wigs that they grow themselves, part of their maturation ceremonies. All sorts of bird of paradise feathers and pig tusk, and they're just stunning. I mean, you know, one of those wigs is worth a fortune, and the tourists try to buy them, of course. Anyway, the Sing Sing is just such a magnificent ritual. I got to film one of those. I got to film the wig men. We went to one of the villages, and Kapari, who was the wig man teacher, had young men there, and they were growing their wigs. They grow a daily wig. It's their own hair, and it's enormous kind of wig. You'll see it coming way out like this. Looks like the old colonial hats, only it's hair, their own hair. And then they do a ceremonial wig, which is the most colorful thing I've ever seen. We got in and filmed the wig men a couple of years before National Geographic got in. It was a matter of just, we had the little camera and we could carry it in. To get one of the big cameras in, you almost had to build a road and everything else to get to where they were, because they were back in the jungle.
The Sing Sing ceremony was part of the wig.
Well, yeah, they wear these elaborate wigs in the Sing Sing, but the Sing Sing ceremony is something that the government started hoping to make it replace the tribal wars. It's a competition, and different tribes send half a dozen or a dozen people to the Sing Sing, which is either at Mount Hagen or Goroka in alternate years. And I mean, it's the most elaborate ceremony you can ever imagine. And the few people who go to New Guinea, they try to go while the Sing Sing's going on. And we got to film some of the Sing Sing people.
So what sort of things do they do for competition besides the wigs? Are part
Sing
of
and
the
dance.
Okay.
And play the drums.
And the wigs are part of at least one group.
The dress is part of all of it, yeah. And they'll have the wig men, of course. They have, you know, the more elaborate they are, the better chance that they have of winning. And so that's what happens there. And it's a beautiful, beautiful kind of thing. Very stunning. We got to witness a couple of the Sing Sing groups. They use sweet potatoes, and the people, you know, some of them have to walk several miles to get to the Sing Sing. They maybe walk 200 miles to get there. So the people along the roadways where they have to go prepares food for them so they could eat it and have food along the way.
So is there a judge to decide
There is, yeah.
who's the winner of the competition?
They have judges at the competition, and they decide these are the winners of the Sing Sing. And it's an amazing thing to watch. And, you know, if I ever get back to New Guinea, that's one of the first things I want to witness again.
So the intention was to stop or slow down
Well,
the eye for an eye, but has that helped at all?
well, I can't tell it's helped a whole lot, but but it's
It's
sure
a lot more fun.
a lot more fun than shooting each other with bows and arrows. Well, now I've heard that guns have gotten into the Highlands, so everything has changed. But you know, when I was there in 1990, there were no guns in the Highlands. So, but you know, but that's it's just too bad that that's happened. But that's just the way it is.
So how did you find this particular tribe that you made your documentary on?
Well, we went when I went there, I had people working in New Guinea to set up that we would visit the Mudmen, and the Mudmen were just a group that I had read about and knew about before I went there. Some of the others I had no idea. I didn't know about the Wigmen. I didn't know about Hubira village where Chief Baiji, where the Huli people collect the skulls of their ancestors, especially the males, and they paint the skulls real elaborately. They used to put them up on racks, and now the government makes them bury them, and then after they've been in the ground long enough for all the flesh to rot away from the skulls, they take the skulls out and paint them, and they put them in a grotto, which is in the shape of a woman.
A grotto is
Like a small cave,
oh, okay.
and it'll have this rock surface, and the woman has breasts, and you know, it's designed in the shape of a woman, and along the stomach area they put the bones, and then they put the skulls beautifully painted above the stomach near the breast, and and they say when they present them, this is my daughter, this is my son, you must take care of them. They're saying to the figure, the stone figure that's carved out. I don't know all the meaning of it, but it's a beautiful kind of ritual.
Like an ancestor
Yeah,
to watch out for those that are
right,
laid out there.
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was fascinating to me. The other thing of the Mudmen, there are hundreds of legends floating around of the Mudmen as to how they started doing that. But the one I liked the best was that they were being chased by their enemies, and they had to go down through this river. And as they went down in the river, and they were climbing up this muddy bank, and they were covered with this mud, and when the enemy got close, they saw them covered with mud, and it scared the enemy, and they ran away. So after that, they started forming these incredible mud masks, monster kinds of masks, and they did a performance for us of what it was like, and that was our major focus of the film, was to be able to film the ritual of the Mudmen.
So they reenacted
Yeah,
how they scared someone and
yeah,
made the mask, and so it was all like a performance.
yes,
So interesting.
yeah, yeah.
So how did you hear about them originally? Was it something like in a magazine or some of your
Well,
research?
no, I read a lot of books on New Guinea and read about people who were in New Guinea, and I knew, for example, I knew all the stories about the Leahy brothers going in there and so forth, and I had a lot of Joy and I always did this on every documentary we ever did. We did an enormous amount of research going into the documentary so that we felt like we had a close understanding and relationship with the people we were working with. And that was true of New Guinea. The one thing I wanted to do and did in New Guinea was up in Tari. It was a terrible rainy day. It's in the rainforest. Beautiful area. We stayed in the Ambua Lodge, which is a lodge built of grass huts way up in the mountains. They have electricity furnished by waterfalls right on site. That's how you get a light bulb. That was the place I had to figure out how I could charge my batteries on the camera. and I finally figured out they had a coffee pot for us to make coffee. And if I took that plug that plugged in the coffee pot, I could plug my equipment into that. So that's the way I charged my batteries there. I learned always to make do.
No solar power in those days.
Well, no, you had to.
Not like,
And anybody that I saw going in with a bigger camera, they would have 4 or 5 hours of battery, and they knew once they shot that, it was all over. But I had, rechargeable batteries, little small batteries for the camera. I learned afterwards to have several rechargeable batteries because you never have enough power, and you can't always find ways to recharge your batteries if you're out in an area where electricity is not exactly common.
so this hotel was unique in some way?
Oh, it's totally unique. I mean, it was grass huts, beautiful grass huts. I mean, comfortable, but the Hyatt Regency they weren't. but no closets, no anything like that. You got your clothes out of your suitcase, and but they had running water, and they had electricity to heat the water. And the electricity, those fire on demand or heating on demand, there's no tank or anything. Just when you turn the thing on, a flame comes up and burns the pipe as the water goes through, and creates kind of a heating of water. But it was fine. It was wonderful. You had a light bulb that you could see things, and the view was absolutely the most incredible view. Up here, looking down into the valley, we were always above the clouds. Every morning you look down and see the clouds through the valley, and you're above the clouds up in the mountains. And that's where the birds of paradise stay, up in that area. And you could walk out and see birds of paradise if you want to. And but everything is self-contained. There was no electric line running in there, barely a road. In fact, when I was on part of it, I wondered if it was a road. It didn't exactly look like it. But I think at the time there were 2 such lodges as that in Papua New Guinea. And if you have fast water running, you can create your own electricity, and that's what they did. But you have to know everything ahead. You have to know, what you want to eat at night, because they can't cook 40 different things, So you have to sign up. Okay, this is what here's my 2 choices, and which one do you want? And that's what we're going to cook tonight. But that was fun, to be able to get in and witness that kind of place. Just a super thing, that's all.
So when you filmed the Mudmen, and were they doing a reenactment at the time that you filmed them?
Well,
and
yeah.
you got to interview them or talk to them?
I got to talk to them, beforehand and afterwards. And the ritual that they did, we had a guide set it up that they would do this for us, so we could, film it. And they had some of their things for sale, which we bought, little seed necklaces and wrist things, like little bracelets of sorts, and we purchased some things from them, and so they made a little money off of us, not enough to survive, but maybe if another tourist or two would come through, it would help them, throughout the year. But it was the ritual itself. They, put the mud on, put the mask on, did the whole thing. Another thing they did, they showed us the starting of a fire, and Boy Scout way, only not with the stick going like that, but with they had a specific way. They had a dry piece of wood split, and they had real fine powdery substance that would catch fire easily. And then they would take a piece of, I think it was bamboo bark, and they would put the dry stuff in a little hole down that stick. It went all the way down to the bottom of the stick where it was split. And then they would put that band of bark underneath and put their foot on and go like that.
So the friction
And the friction of that bark,
with the powdery substance.
would get it started. And I actually filmed it. It was like 2 minutes and so many seconds before the flame was actually coming up. And I thought, that's almost as fast as striking a match, if you're out in the wilderness. I mean, you think in those, different from a flintlock or something that you're trying to get a spark to get something started. But, the indigenous people have always found ways to do those kinds of things. When we went into the highlands of Mount Hagen, first of all, seemed like every man there had a dark beard. And Joy said, I've never in my life felt like I feel here. She said, I feel like I'm standing among 1,000 Abraham Lincolns.
Oh. So did they dye them, or they just, their beards were black?
No, that was just the color of their
dark.
Yeah, dark beards, that's all. And every man had one, no, except the kids,
So how did you, before you went there, how did you select Papua New Guinea as your first to do a documentary on?
Well, it was, I was just selecting a place and then said, okay, this will be where I attempt my first documentary. It wasn't so much, okay, I'm going to do a documentary. I knew I wanted to get into making documentaries, and I researched the camera and wound up with that. Back in those days, we had a choice, those video cameras that big, or they had come up with a smaller camera that you had to put the film in a larger case to play it. It was, the mini VHS or whatever they were called. And there were other things coming out, but I wound up, I'm glad I did. The little Video 8 camera that I had still works. And the film that I did on that camera is still good.
Wow.
And every other camera I've used, except when I switched over to digital, every other camera I've used, the film deteriorates. The VHS deteriorates. The colors mess up big time after a lot of years. They still play, but the colors don't look right. But the Video 8 looks as good now as it did when I filmed it. I mean, I wish I'd have done a lot more. When High 8 came in, High 8 was a much better quality immediately, but lasting quality, just didn't do it. If you don't get your high 8 stuff on digital, you're going to lose it, period. Just anything in high 8 that's not transferred to digital is going to be gone. And, you know, there's not anything you can do about it. It just disappears. Well,
Right.
you know, it starts getting waves and stuff through it, and it's not usable. But the regular video 8 camera,
So you hired a interpreter or someone that set up?
we did.
So to organize your trip, you had,
We had
No.
people in New Guinea working for us, yeah.
okay,
Yeah, that we hired ahead of time. I knew better than to just go in and we did a lot of things on our own after we got there and had a lot of, you know, we'd say, okay, I want to do this. For example, people at the lodge were going out to see the birds of paradise, and I said to my guide and interpreter, Pazio Aroli, I said, I don't want to go out and see the birds of paradise. I said, what I want to do, I said, have you got in the tribe here some older men that I'd like to interview those? And I want to talk to them about where they hear any of them when the Leahy brothers came there in 1931, and there were. Even though the average age in New Guinea is probably 45 or 50. I mean, that's the life expectancy. There were some old men around that had been there in the 90s in 1931.
and they knew of them.
Oh, they knew him, yeah. And that's part of the film, really. It was a wonderful experience of interviewing those men. I remember one whose name was Hambuli, and he made some kind of statement like, my name is Hambuli, and then he says, we found when the white man came that, we tried to make these changes because things would be better, but we found that they weren't. And then he said, and now we're going to try to put ourselves back together again. And boy, I just overwhelmed me when I heard that. And right in the middle of our interview, and it was an awful day, it was pouring down the rain, and Joy held an umbrella over me and she was trying to work the camera and film, and I'm trying to interview these guys, and they're sitting under a little roof sticking out over the edge of the shed, sitting on buckets or something. Some rains are coming down, but it worked. I mean, it's just you do what you need to do to make it work. It worked. And right in the middle, Paji was interpreting, and right in the middle he stopped and he said, they want to hear your story. I said, okay. So I, went over and said that I grew up in the woods, like their woods, and we had log places, not exactly like theirs, but similar. And then I said that I became a teacher, and I would have been proud if they had been my teacher. They were, they were Wigman teachers, and it was a good moment. I mean, it was one of the things that, one of it was just learning technical stuff of cameras and everything else. I was, as I said, I thought I was going to try to be a war correspondent when I got in the tribal war and found out I wasn't much good at all. I was trying to film moving in the Jeep. I think I got more film of the Jeep roof than I did the actual war. But Joy was pretty calm about all of it. I mean, the window was open. I was trying to film out. She reaches back and closes the window to keep arrows from flying. But the older men was a special thing. The mud men, every instance. We got into some dangerous situations, not because they would be after us, but just because of the situation itself. The tribal war, they wouldn't. If we got hurt, it was because they were trying to kill somebody else, and we just happened to be in the middle. They weren't after us.
So you said there were arrows kind of flying around the Jeep or outside of the Jeep?
Yeah, they were shooting, and they were burning villages down, and they were pretty serious. After we got through the main part of it, our guide William said we were really lucky, because he said the battle, which I thought was getting heavy, he said, no, it was just getting started. It really got heavy when we got through. And he stopped and told other people, warned other people that there's a battle going on down there. But everywhere I went in Papua New Guinea, I learned something. I learned that they if they had an arrow wound, they had a plant, and I rubbed the plant on me, and it stung me like nettle stings. But they would rub that on it, and that helped heal the wound. Amazing kind of things, that ways of indigenous people that we've lost. When we brought Paji here, I just went to my Native American collection and pulled out a scraper. And I didn't say Paji, I just said, I want you to see this. And he picked it up and showed me how to use it. He's in Papua New Guinea, Native America's on the other side of the world.
The technology for them and their development doesn't matter where it was.
It doesn't matter. It's here they are then it was the 20th century. Here they were in the 20th century, and they knew how to use things that were 500,000 years old, who knows. It's the way people are. And for me, filming, and especially Papua New Guinea, was, I know these things are not going to be there forever, and somebody ought to put them down, as Michael Leahy did when he went in 1931. A group of Australian documentary makers did a film called First Contact, and here they used footage that Michael Leahy filmed in 1931. So you see the people, and you see their reactions, and you know what they're feeling. We saw pictures of Michael Rockefeller. He went into New Guinea. In fact, the whole art collection at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the whole art collection there was of Papua New Guinea came from Michael Rockefeller, sending it back. We saw a picture of him, and you can see his face. And there's such a glow on his face of what he's experiencing. And Joy said, I know exactly how he feels. And I did too. You have that, you're coming in contact with something that you've never witnessed before. You've had experiences that show you different things, but here's this one moment that is just overwhelming. Just happy to be there.
You got that smile. Won't you stay with me a while? I think I like you. I think I like you. If a turtle and and still ever ran a race. I wonder who win, who lose in disgrace. My mind tends to wander, so don't be alarmed. I think I like you. I think I like you.
Lee Pennington has been a friend for over 30 years, or darn close to it, having given programs to our AAPS, and before we even had a name, Ancient Artifact Preservation Society. And he always gave interesting programs. He was always so charming and humble. And I didn't know for several years what a long list of credentials he had. Author, filmmaker, Pulitzer Prize nominee, poet, world traveler, a real romantic, a musician, a storyteller, and one heck of a nice guy. And what I've noticed in talking with him about his travels to other places, meeting other people, he doesn't judge them. He sees the good in everybody, no matter how different they may seem or anything about their lifestyles. He just is open to like people, and they like him back. He's one of those kind of friends that we are proud to have in our lives. My husband and myself, our archaeology group, he really has been a gift to us, to AAPS, a gift to Kentucky, to all of his friends, and to the whole world. Bless his dear heart.
Stay tuned for episode 2 of the story behind the story of Lee Pennington, extended version.